Chapter 1: Arrival. The town was smaller than I expected. A scattering of old brick buildings and peeling paint, streets that seemed to curve more than they should, as if hiding something just out of sight. I had driven for hours along winding country roads, my GPS insisting I hadn't yet arrived, even when the address matched the listing I'd found online. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and smoke, and the kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It presses on your chest, demanding attention. I turned onto a narrow lane, flanked by skeletal trees whose branches scratched the sky like long, dry fingers. At the end of the lane, the house loomed. It was an old Victorian, its paint flaking, windows clouded with years of neglect. The front porch sagged as if weighed down by unseen shoulders. I parked my car and stared, feeling the first prickle of unease tickle my spine. This was supposed to be my retreat, a quiet place to finish my freelance article series and gather my thoughts. Yet, as I approached the front door, a part of me hesitated. I shook it off. Rational thoughts, I told myself. Old houses creak, shadows play tricks, that was all. The key turned with a reluctant groan, and the door swung open into a dark hall smelling of dust, mildew, and something I couldn't place. The air was thick, almost viscous, as if the house itself exhaled when I stepped inside. My footsteps echoed loudly against the wooden floors. Every sound seemed too pronounced, too deliberate. I set down my bags in the main room, letting my eyes roam. The furniture was covered in yellow sheets like ghosts sleeping beneath fabric. A grand staircase twisted upward, banisters coated in a fine layer of grime. Sunlight spilled unevenly through grimy windows, highlighting the particles floating lazily in the air. I found the kitchen next. Old pots hung from hooks, rust eating into their edges. The sink was clogged with brown water that refused to drain. I switched on the lights, but some bulbs flickered and died in mid-glow, leaving the room half lit, half swallowed by shadows. I laughed nervously at myself. Classic horror movie setup, right? But the unease was real. I turned to the bedrooms next. One had a cracked mirror, reflecting me in a way that felt just a little off, like my reflection lagged behind my movements. I shook my head. I was tired. I'd been driving since sunrise. Tomorrow, I'd unpack, set up my workspace, and begin writing. I returned to the main room and sank into the threadbare sofa, listening. The house creaked and sighed, settling around me. But then, beneath the ordinary groans, I thought I heard it. A whisper, soft, almost imperceptible, coming from upstairs. I froze. My heart thumped in my ears. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling despite my attempt at calm. Silence answered. I told myself it was the wind, the house settling, nothing more. I went to the window and looked out at the lane. The trees swayed gently, and the sun had begun its slow descent behind the hills. Yet the whisper returned, faint but unmistakable, like the hushed words of someone standing just beyond the doorway. I tried to focus on unpacking, forcing my mind onto practicalities, setting up the desk, arranging my laptop, finding a place for my clothes. But the whisper clung to the edges of my consciousness. Each creak of the floorboards felt deliberate, each shadow in the corner of my vision lingering longer than it should. Night came faster than I expected. I lit a small lamp, its light warm but fragile against the darkness of the old house. I tried to read, tried to immerse myself in mundane tasks, but every few minutes I caught movement in the hallway, something that wasn't there when I looked directly.
At some point, exhaustion overtook fear. I climbed the staircase to my bedroom, feeling the weight of the house pressing down on me. I pulled the blanket around my shoulders and lay down, staring at the ceiling. The whispers returned, soft, urgent, impossibly close. Not a voice exactly, but a presence. And for the first time, I realized this was no ordinary house. As sleep edged toward me, I thought I heard a soft, deliberate tap from the hallway outside my door. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I told myself it was a branch brushing against the siding, a loose shutter, anything but the truth. But deep down, a primal part of me knew I was not alone, and whatever waited in the shadows had been expecting me.
Chapter 2, First Night. The first night arrived slowly, dragging with it a weight I hadn't anticipated. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the house bathed in a sickly twilight. Shadows lengthened, stretching across the walls like reaching fingers. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself that this was just an old house settling, that my imagination was overactive. But the silence, it wasn't peaceful. It pressed against my ears and my chest, filling every empty corner with expectation. I had barely closed my laptop when I heard it. A soft, scraping noise from upstairs, like nails dragging across wood. My breath caught, and I froze. For a moment, I thought I imagined it, but then it came again. Slow, deliberate, methodical. I told myself to be rational. The wind, I whispered aloud. But even as I said it, my voice felt small, fragile against the vastness of the old house. I tried to listen for any natural explanation. The sound stopped. I exhaled, convincing myself that I'd misheard, that my nerves were making a phantom from nothing. Minutes later, the sound returned, this time accompanied by another. Faint, like someone dragging something heavy across the hallway floor. My pulse quickened, and I gripped the edge of the sofa. I considered calling the police, but I had no one in town to call from. And besides, I knew rational people would hear a creaking floor and laugh it off. I got up cautiously, flashlight in hand, and started toward the staircase. Each step I took seemed louder than it should have been, echoing in the hall like a drumbeat announcing my trespass. Halfway up, the air shifted. I felt it. A chill that wasn't from the night air. A sudden weight pressing on my shoulders and chest. My skin prickled, goosebumps rising in patterns that felt almost like fingers brushing against me. I stopped and listened. Nothing. I strained, trying to catch any sound, any hint of explanation. That's when I noticed it. The faint smell of smoke curling around the edges of the stairwell. Not from outside, but inside. Faint, acrid, like something smoldering, but the fireplace hadn't been touched. I forced myself to continue upstairs, gripping the banister tightly. At the top, the hallway stretched in front of me, lined with doors I hadn't explored yet. The air seemed to pulse, heavy with anticipation. I approached the first door on the left. It was my bedroom. I opened it slowly, and everything seemed normal, untouched. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it,
trying to slow my racing heart. Then I heard it, a whisper, low, almost beneath the level of sound, but unmistakable. A voice, fragmented, soft. Leave, leave, leave. I froze, my mind snapping between disbelief and mounting terror. I wanted to laugh at myself, but the laugh died in my throat. My rationality was a fragile cage, rattling under the pressure of what I was experiencing. I turned toward the hallway and caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, darker than the dim light allowed, flitted past the end of the hall. I blinked. Nothing. I blinked again. Nothing. But the sense of being watched, of something waiting just beyond the edge of my vision, remained. I retreated into my bedroom, locked the door, and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the house was amplified, every gust of wind a threat. I kept my flashlight within reach, the beam cutting through the darkness like a protective barrier. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt meaningless in the oppressive silence. And then I heard it again. This time, not from the hallway, but from the walls themselves. A soft scratching coming from inside the plaster, behind the wallpaper. It circled the room, moving slowly, deliberately, like something alive beneath the walls. I pressed my ear against the door. Nothing. I turned, shining the flashlight around the room, catching every corner, every shadow. Nothing. And yet, I could feel it, watching me, waiting, patient, relentless. By the time dawn broke, pale light filtering weakly through the grime-streaked windows, I hadn't slept. I hadn't moved from my bed except to check the doors and windows repeatedly. My phone lay dead on the nightstand. The battery had inexplicably drained overnight. I stared out the window at the rising sun, feeling absurdly vulnerable. The world outside was normal, mundane, indifferent. Inside, however, the house hummed with life, its own secret pulse, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had not yet seen anything. Whatever haunted this house, it was patient, and it had only just begun.
Chapter 3: The Town Whispers. The next morning, I left the house with a sense of purpose, or perhaps desperation. I needed to remind myself that the world outside was ordinary, mundane, sane. I drove into the town, a place that felt suspended in time, where narrow streets curled around brick buildings and the faint smell of old bakery bread mingled with the crisp autumn air. I stopped at a small cafe, hoping for coffee and something resembling human company. Inside, a few patrons glanced at me briefly, then returned to their conversations. The barista, a woman with thin, pale skin and a nervous smile, handed me my coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "You're new here," she said, her voice cautious. "Are you staying at the old Whitmore place?" I stiffened. "Yes," I admitted, trying to sound casual. "Just for a few weeks. I need some quiet to work." Her eyes flicked toward the window, toward the distant hill where the house lay like a shadow over the town. "Quiet," she repeated slowly, almost as a warning. "Be careful what you're looking for." I smiled, dismissing it as small-town superstition. "Thanks, I'll keep that in mind." She didn't answer, but I noticed the way the other patrons' eyes shifted, brief glances toward me in the door, as though I were an intruder into a shared secret. There was a tension here, subtle but unmistakable, as if the town itself were holding its breath. Curiosity gnawed at me. I asked about the house,
about its history, and immediately regret flashed across the barista's face. Some things are better left alone. But a few years back, there were incidents, strange disappearances, people who went in and never came out the same, or didn't come back at all. Her words sent a chill down my spine. I pressed on. Incidents? Like what? She hesitated, glancing nervously at a corner where a man sipped his coffee silently. Unexplained noises, shadows that move. Some say the house, it watches. People leave, but they're never really the same. And some never leave. I nodded slowly, forcing calm over the rising panic in my chest. Rationally, I knew she was speaking in legend, superstition, fear passed down like a warning. But there was an edge to her voice, a weight that didn't feel like idle gossip. After the cafe, I wandered the town, looking for any records or archives that might explain the house's history. I found a small library, dusty and quiet, where a librarian pulled out old newspapers and journals for me. As I leafed through the brittle pages, a pattern emerged. The Whitmore House had a history of tragedies, fires, mysterious deaths, sudden disappearances, each generation leaving behind whispers and rumors, yet no one had been able to fully explain what happened. By the time I returned to the house, the sun had dipped low. The town's warnings lingered in my mind. People avoided looking directly at the house from the street, as though acknowledging it gave it power. And the way they spoke, in hushed tones and sideways glances, left me with an uneasy sense that I had crossed an invisible threshold just by deciding to stay there. Inside the house, everything was the same, yet it felt different, waiting, watching. I unpacked the few things I hadn't yet arranged, but each movement seemed accompanied by faint noises, scratches, whispers, the subtle shift of air as though someone had passed behind me. And for the first time, I realized the warnings weren't just superstition. There was a presence here, patient, observing, and it didn't like being ignored. That night, as the sun vanished completely, I laid awake, listening. The house's murmurs were louder, clearer, almost deliberate. It felt as though the very walls were trying to communicate, sending messages that I couldn't fully understand. My rational mind wanted to attribute it all to nerves, exhaustion, imagination. But my gut told me otherwise. Somewhere in the shadows, the house was alive, and it had noticed me. Chapter 4. Disturbing Discoveries. The fourth day began with a headache that felt rooted somewhere deep behind my eyes. I had barely slept, only a handful of restless minutes strung together between whispers, scratching noises, and the oppressive sense of being watched. Morning light filtered weakly through the windows, illuminating the dust that floated in lazy spirals, as if the air itself were thick with memory. I needed answers. The library's newspaper clippings had hinted at tragedies, but not enough to understand the full story. If the townspeople wouldn't speak openly, then I'd find the truth inside the house itself. Old houses hoarded history. They tucked memories inside closets, attics, and forgotten drawers. And that could feel this house wanted to be found, or it wanted to reveal itself. I wasn't sure which was worse. I started in the living room, checking behind furniture and inside cabinets. Most were empty, save for a few rusted nails or scraps of yellowed fabric. But near the fireplace, behind a panel warped with age, I discovered a hollow cavity. My heart thudded as I reached in, expecting cobwebs or mice. Instead, my fingers brushed something solid, wood. I pulled out a small wooden box, its surface carved with swirling patterns like vines twisting in on themselves. The latch had rusted, but after a few forceful tugs, it snapped open. Inside were photographs and a diary. The photographs were old, the edges frayed, the images washed in sepia tones. A family stood in front of the house, parents with stiff expressions, a daughter with hollow eyes, and a young boy who didn't smile. There was something wrong with the pictures, not in what they showed, but in the atmosphere around them. The children looked drained, as if life had been pulled out of them long before the photo was taken. The diary belonged to the mother, Margaret Whitmore. March 3, 1957. The walls speak at night. I hear them whispering in a language I cannot understand. Thomas says it's the wind, but the wind does not call my name. I swallowed hard and turned the page. April 12, 1957. The children are not sleeping. They wake with scratches on their arms and say something crawled across their beds. Thomas is angry, but I see the fear in his eyes. The house is hungry. I feel it watching us. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The handwriting grew shakier as the entries progressed. May 19th, 1957. The thing in the walls wants the children. I hear it pacing at night, moving through the house. Last night, Anna screamed. When I reached her room, the air was so cold, I could see my breath. I cannot keep them safe. I stopped reading. My hands were trembling. There were more entries, dozens, but I couldn't continue. The words crawled under my skin, echoing my own fears from the past nights. It was as if the house repeated itself, generation after generation, feeding on those who lived here. The last page was smeared, water damaged, or stained by something darker. I couldn't make out the words clearly, but the final line chilled me. It won't let us leave. I closed the diary, my heart pounding painfully. I needed fresh air. I stepped outside onto the porch, breathing deeply, trying to ground myself. The town lay quiet beyond the hill, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the horrors perched above them. The trees swayed in a slow, eerie rhythm, their branches rustling like whispered warnings. When I went back inside, the house felt heavier, as though it knew I had discovered something it wanted to keep hidden. I carried the box upstairs to my room, planning to sort through the photographs more carefully. As I reached the landing, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A door. Not a new door, but one I somehow hadn't seen. The third door on the right side of the hallway. It should have been obvious, yet it felt revealed, like it had decided to appear. My hand hovered over the knob. Everything in me screamed, "Don't touch it." But curiosity and something deeper, like a pull, won. The room beyond was small, barely large enough for a bed and a dresser, dustily thick on the floor. And on the wall, carved faintly into the wood, were claw marks. Long, desperate, human-sized claw marks. My breath hitched. Something thud inside the walls. Once. Twice. Slow and deliberate. A warning. I stepped back. The air in the room shifted, turning icy. I didn't wait. I slammed the door shut and stumbled down the hall, the wooden floor groaning beneath me as though the house disapproved. Back in my room, I locked the door, even though I knew it wouldn't matter. As night fell again, a heavy dread settled over me. I stared at the diary lying on the bed, at the box of photographs, and I realized the truth. Whatever happened to the Whitmore family hadn't left. It was still here,
still hungry, still waiting. And I was next. Chapter 5: Sleep and Shadows. Sleep became a stranger to me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe. That's the only way I can describe it. The walls expanded and contracted with slow, rhythmic groans, as though lungs were hidden somewhere within the wooden beams, inhaling deeply, exhaling with a tired sigh. I felt like a guest in something alive. For hours, I tossed and turned, exhausted yet unable to let go. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the diary's final line: "It won't let us leave." The words looped through my mind until they felt like a whisper brushing the back of my neck. Around 3 a.m., the scratching began again. Soft at first, like tiny fingers dragging across plaster. Then louder, more urgent, moving across the room in slow circles. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound vibrated through the bed frame, through the floorboards, through my bones. I sat up, heart hammering, and flicked on the bedside lamp. The scratching stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood. The floorboards were cold beneath my feet, colder than they should have been. I inched toward the wall where the noise had been coming from, half prepared to see a mouse hole or some easy explanation. Instead, I found the wallpaper slightly raised, as though something beneath it was pushing outward. I reached out with a trembling hand and tapped the wall. It tapped back. I stumbled away so fast I almost fell. My breath came in sharp gasps. I grabbed my phone, dead again, despite being plugged in. I yanked the cable. The outlet sparked faintly, but the phone stayed dark. The house didn't want me calling for help. Outside, the wind picked up, howling against the windows. Shadows flickered across the hallway beyond my door, as though someone walked slowly back and forth with a lantern. I tried to tell myself it was the moonlight, tricks of wind and branches, but I knew better. This was deliberate. This was attention. Close to dawn, I must have dozed off, because I woke to a sound that froze every muscle in my body. Footsteps. Inside my room. Slow, heavy, dragging along the wooden floor. I didn't move. My eyes were barely open, just enough to see the shape, tall, hunched, no more than a dark silhouette, standing near the foot of my bed. I held my breath. The shape leaned forward slightly as though studying me. I blinked. It was gone. Just like that. The sunlight bleeding through the curtains told me I wasn't dreaming. My chest ached from holding my breath for too long. Tears stung my eyes before I even realized I was crying. Something had been in the room with me, and it had watched me sleep. The rest of the morning passed in a fog. I wandered through the house, dizzy with exhaustion, unable to distinguish between my thoughts and the whispers echoing faintly in the halls. The house felt different, more awake, more aware. I could sense it observing me with interest, like a predator deciding how best to corner prey. In the kitchen, I noticed something I hadn't before. A door, at the far end, partially hidden behind a wooden shelf. The hinges were rusted and warped, but the something about it felt new, as if the house had shifted to reveal it. A basement. Of course there would be a basement.
Every instinct screamed at me not to go near it, not to open that door, not to give the house what it wanted. But I couldn't ignore the pull. Curiosity blended with dread, a toxic mixture that tightened around my ribs. I reached for the doorknob. Ice cold, colder than the air around it. I pulled my hand back instantly. Not yet. Not alone. I stepped away from the door and backed into the center of the kitchen, forcing myself to breathe. The house creaked softly, almost a disappointed sound. I wasn't ready to see what waited below. That night, sleep didn't come at all. The shadows stayed near the edges of my vision, shifting like silhouettes waiting for me to blink. And the whispers, soft, unintelligible, but insistent, never stopped. I began to understand the Whitmore family. The house didn't attack outright. It wore you down, stole your sleep, stole your sanity, stole your sense of what was real. Until one day, you weren't strong enough to fight it anymore, and that was when it took you. As the sun rose on another sleepless night, I realized something with icy clarity. The house wasn't trying to scare me. It was preparing me. It was softening me up. And soon, it would want me to go into the basement. Chapter 6: The Things That Watch. The house felt different after the basement door opened, like a boundary had been crossed that was never meant to be touched. The air held a charge, a strange tension, as if the walls were listening now, waiting. By the next night, exhaustion had me moving on autopilot. I kept every light on, every door shut, every window locked. But the sense of being watched lingered behind me constantly, like a cold fingertip trailing along my spine. I tried to sleep on the couch, close to the front door, just in case. The glow from the lamp beside me pushed back the darkness, but only barely. It was as if the shadows in the corners grew heavier, thicker, like they were pulling. At around 2:30 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy, pacing somewhere above me. My breath left my lungs in a shaky exhale. I stared up at the ceiling, unmoving, listening. Step, pause. Step, pause. Whoever, whatever was walking knew I was awake. The footsteps stopped directly above me, right above the couch. A low vibration hummed through the ceiling like weight shifting or breathing. My fingers curled into the blanket, knuckles white. Then the whispering began again. Not from upstairs this time, from the walls. It seeped through the plaster like water through cracks, a chorus of fragmented voices overlapping in a frantic, disjointed murmur. Hundreds of whispers, all threading together into something sickeningly alive. I pressed my hands over my ears. It didn't help. The voices weren't speaking to me, they were speaking about me. And every so often, one slipped through clearly. Watching. Closer now. He opened the door. We see him. My heartbeat thundered in my chest. I stood up abruptly, dizzy with fear, and backed toward the front door. My hand fumbled for the lock, but before I could turn it, a loud thud shook the ceiling. Then another, and another. Heavy, dragging footsteps raced across the second floor, directly toward the stairs. I spun around, watching the shadow of something large and distorted spill across the landing upstairs. The light didn't catch its form fully, but I saw hints of shape, elongated limbs, a hunched silhouette, wrong angles. It paused at the top step, breathing, waiting.
My hand gripped the doorknob as hard as I could. I was ready to run, to break the lock, to crash through the door if I had to, but then something else moved behind me. A faint reflection in the window beside the door caught my eye. Something stood outside. Close. Very close. Not a person. Not an animal. Something tall, thin, and completely still, watching the house with a face I couldn't fully see, blurred, distorted, shifting. I realized with sudden horror there wasn't just one thing in this house. There were multiple. Some inside, some outside, and they were all waiting for me to make a mistake, for me to choose a direction, up the stairs toward the thing that breathed, or outside toward the thing that watched. I felt frozen between nightmares, and somewhere, deep in the walls, the whispers turned into laughter. Chapter 7. The Basement Beckons. The house had learned my fear. It no longer whispered, it commanded. By the 7th night, sleep had abandoned me entirely. My body ached, my eyes burned, and every shadow in the house seemed alive, twitching at the edge of my vision. The basement door, the door I had barricaded, called to me. Not in words, but in something deeper. A pull, cold and irresistible, like the gravity of some unseen moon. I tried to resist. I walked past the door countless times, staring straight ahead, pretending it didn't exist. But every step I took felt heavier. The air grew thick and suffocating, the walls pulsating subtly, like a heartbeat. Then came the whispers again, this time from below. You must come. You must see. You opened it. I froze. My chest tightened. The voices weren't angry. They were patient. They were inviting. I wanted to scream, to run, to leave. But something deeper, something that was already inside me, pulled me toward the basement. I approached the door slowly, each step echoing through the house. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. The moment my fingers touched the cold metal, the house shifted. A shadow moved behind me, faster than any human could. I spun around. Nothing. But the feeling of being watched intensified, as if the house itself had eyes hidden in every corner. The doorknob turned easily. The chair I had wedged against it toppled with the clatter, sliding across the floor. I swallowed hard and stepped inside. Darkness swallowed me. My flashlight flickered, barely illuminating the steps descending into the bowels of the house. The air smelled of damp earth, rust, and something sweet and metallic I couldn't identify. At the bottom of the stairs, I saw them. Marks carved into the wooden floor, walls, and ceiling. Shapes, symbols, patterns that pulsed faintly, as if alive. I recognized some of them from the Whitmore diary, scrawled in a shaky hand, the same marks that had preceded each tragedy. The whispering came again, louder, surrounding me. Welcome, welcome, finally. I stepped forward, my body moving despite my mind screaming to run. Shadows shifted in the corners, forming shapes that loomed like people, though twisted and wrong. I could hear scraping from deeper in the basement, a slow, deliberate movement, as if something was coming toward me from the dark. A sudden flash of movement, something small, fast, crawling along the wall, made me stumble. My flashlight fell, clattering across the floor, casting jagged shadows. Then I saw it,
the source of the basement's life. A figure, hunched and thin, taller than any man should be, with limbs bent at impossible angles. Its face was obscured, writhing as though made of shadows and smoke, yet I felt its eyes boring at me. It whispered my name. My knees buckled. The walls seemed to close in. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the house, the basement, wouldn't let me. And then I understood. The diary, the claw marks, the footprints, the shadows, the whispers. The house had never been empty. It had been waiting for someone curious enough, foolish enough to come down. And now I was standing directly in its path. The shadowed figure stepped forward. Its movement was unnatural, jerky, yet fluid, as if the laws of physics were bending to its will. The whispers intensified, chanting, murmuring, coaxing me forward. I realized with cold, bone-deep certainty, this house did not just want to scare me. It wanted me.
Chapter 8. Facing the Darkness. I had no choice. The basement had become a living entity, pulling me deeper with every heartbeat, every step echoing like a drum of inevitability. The shadows coiled around me, whispering my name, coaxing me forward, reminding me that I had already crossed the threshold. I pressed on, flashlight trembling in my hand, though the beam barely cut through the oppressive black. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in rhythm with my pulse. The carvings I had seen at the bottom of the stairs glowed faintly, like runes coming to life under the weight of my fear. A figure emerged from the far corner, a shadow hunched impossibly high, its movements jerking and unnatural. Its face, if it could be called that, twisted in ways that made my stomach churn. Eyes, countless eyes, opened in its darkness, watching, seeing, knowing everything. The whispers intensified. They weren't voices anymore. They were a chorus of pain, sorrow, hunger, and anticipation. They spoke in unison. You came. You belong. I stumbled backward, tripping over something soft yet unyielding. I glanced down and saw remnants of the past, tattered clothes, fragments of toys, old photographs scorched and decayed, and the faint, unmistakable imprint of clawed hands in the dirt-stained floor. The Whitmores, and others before them. A low grinding sound echoed from the walls, like the house itself was rearranging itself around me. The floorboards shifted beneath my feet. The air thickened in a cold that burned with every step cut through me. The shadow reached toward me, its limbs twisted unnaturally, folding in impossible angles. A voice, a low guttural whisper, escaped from it. "Stay forever!" I screamed. My flashlight fell. Darkness swallowed me. The figure moved closer. I tried to run, but the basement seemed endless now. Every step forward led me deeper, yet I felt no closer to escape. The walls themselves closed in, pressing against my chest and head. My lungs burned, my vision blurred. Then, in a fleeting moment of clarity, I remembered the diary, the mother's last words. It won't let us leave. I realized then what the house fed on. Fear, desperation, the belief that escape was impossible. The shadows, the whispers, the crawling darkness, they were extensions of the house, born from every soul trapped before me. I forced myself to breathe, to resist, to believe I could leave.
The shadows lunged, reaching with elongated fingers, tendrils of darkness stretching toward me. I ran. I ran blindly, clinging to the wall. I could hear the whispers screaming, furious, as if their hunger had been denied. My hand found the basement stairs. I scrambled up, nearly falling with every step. Behind me, the house shuddered, screaming, crying out as though I had defied it. The moment I crossed the threshold into the hallway, the basement door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I didn't stop. I ran upstairs, past every door, every shadow, until I reached the front door. Outside, the world was still normal, quiet, indifferent. The town lay in pale morning light. I fell to the ground, gasping, trembling, my body spent and trembling with fear. The house loomed behind me, silent, waiting, patient, not defeated, just delayed. I understood then. I had survived. This time. But the house did not forgive. It did not forget. It only waited for the next curious soul.
Chapter 9, Aftermath. The sun rose slowly, pale and indifferent, over the town. Its light did little to chase away the shadows that lingered inside me. I sat on the curb outside the Whitmore house, knees pulled to my chest, shaking. My hands were raw from gripping the door, my throat sore from screaming, my mind tangled in a chaos that felt both unreal and eternal. People passed by without noticing. A child laughed on the sidewalk. A man watered his front garden. Life went on, ordinary and mundane, while I had walked through something that was not life, not anything human. I wanted to tell someone, but how could I explain it? The whispers, the shadows, the crawling darkness in the basement, they had no shape in the world of the sane. Who would believe me? Who would understand? I thought about the diary about Margaret Whitmore and her children, and all the families who had come before me. They had been swallowed by fear, consumed by the house slowly, meticulously, until they were gone. I had escaped, but barely. Even now, my mind didn't rest. Every quiet moment, I imagined shadows moving at the edge of my vision. Every creak of a floorboard sounded deliberate, a reminder. I wasn't safe. Not really. Not yet. Yet, the morning brought clarity of a different kind. Survival wasn't just running, it was remembering. I had to remember, to warn, even if no one would listen. The house thrived on secrecy. Knowledge, understanding, memory, they weakened it. That was why the town whispered but did not act. That was why generations disappeared quietly. I took one last look at the house. Its windows gleamed faintly in the sunlight, innocent from the outside. No smoke, no movement, no hint of the horror within. Yet I could feel it, the weight of it, watching me from every corner, through every wall, patient, eternal. I rose to my feet, trembling, and walked away slowly. I did not look back. I couldn't. Not yet. Not ever. Behind me, the house waited, and in the shadows of the street, unseen, faintly, a whisper drifted through the morning air. We see you. Waiting. Always. I knew then that the story wasn't over. It never truly ends. Some doors, once opened, are never closed again. Some houses, once entered, never let go. And the Whitmore house would wait forever. for the next one. Epilog. The shadow lingers. Weeks had passed since I fled the Whitmore house, but the house had not left me. The streets of town were bright, ordinary, and filled with people who laughed and argued and lived as though nothing ever happened. I moved among them, yet I was no longer part of their world. At night I slept fitfully, shadows clinging to the corners of my bedroom, every creak of the floor, every wind-blown rustle of leaves outside made me start. The whispers had faded, but only slightly, as if biding their time, waiting for the next lapse in courage or awareness. I tried to tell myself I had survived, that rational thought, daylight, and distance could protect me. But the truth was unmistakable. The house had marked me. Something had followed me, tethered itself to my fear. Sometimes in reflective surfaces, a window, a mirror, the black screen of my phone, I could see movement, flickers of shadow that didn't belong. Always just beyond the edge of sight, always watching. Friends asked why I seemed different, why I flinched at ordinary sounds, why I walked faster past old buildings or unlit alleyways. I smiled, I lied. I said I had been stressed, overworked, exhausted. Only I knew the truth. The Whitmore house and whatever lived within it had taught me something fundamental. Fear was not just an emotion. It was a presence, a memory, a companion that never truly left. I moved to another town, changed my apartment, avoided old houses, old roads, anything that could remind me. And yet, some nights I wake in the darkness, and the whisper comes. Soft, patient, familiar. We see you, waiting. Always. I know I will never be free. The house waits for everyone, and some of its shadows travel farther than its walls. I live now with the knowledge that horror doesn't always end. It lingers in quiet moments, in the corners of familiar rooms, and the spaces where light is weak and shadows are long. And somewhere, far away, or perhaps very near, the Whitmore house continues to wait, patient, hungry, eternal. Because doors once opened never truly close, and some shadows never leave.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. We'll see you in the next video.